introduce today Konrad Pesendorfer. He's from the Statistical Austria, and the title has changed a little bit about his speech today, but it's more or less about statistics and policy making in Europe.
Okay. Yeah, first of all, thank you very much for inviting me and for having the opportunity to talk to you today. Maybe before I start straight away with the presentation, a few words to my personal professional career that I had. By training, I'm an economist, and I had the privilege to work for several international organizations, including the OECD and the European Central Bank. I started my career in the Austrian Central Bank, and then I had the opportunity to work for the ECB for 2 years, and then coming back to Vienna again, I worked together with in the office of the Austrian Prime Minister, being his economic policy advisor. Before, in the beginning of 2010, I took up my current position, which is Director General in the Statistical Institute of Austria, Statistics Austria. What I will try to do in the 3/4 of an hour that was given to me is basically to talk about 4 points. The first thing I will do is to talk about the production of statistics, both in Austria, in Statistics Austria, but also at the European level. And I will talk about the institutional setup, how decisions are being made, and how we produce our statistics. And then I will come to the maybe more interesting part for you, to the policy part. I will talk about the European statistics linkage with the economic and financial crisis, and of course you can't talk about this without touching the case of Greece, which was running through all the media, and I will try to explain what led to the situation that we experienced and what the consequences were after that, and what the Greek experience had an impact on the European level and on our work being part of the European Union as well. Then I will pick out 3 examples where the interlinkage between statistics on the one hand and policymaking on the other hand is very visible. I will talk about public finance statistics, the macroeconomic imbalances procedure, and the Europe 2020 objectives, because there is, in each of those 3 themes, there is a close linkage to our work as a statistical office. And finally, I will conclude by highlighting some challenges that I see, both on the national but also on the European level. So let me first come to our national perspective, how we produce statistics in Austria. A few words on Statistics Austria itself. We have around 830 staff members in our Statistics Institute. We only have a share of 28% who have an academic degree. This number varies a lot across Europe, and we have a majority of women working in our institute. There are 3 different types of staff members. Still, the civil servants and the public employees, Vertragsbedienstete, I don't know the exact translation to English, but it's a kind of modern version of civil servant. These part of the staff are decreasing, while the private sector employees is the increasing share of the staff members. We are producing statistics according to several principles that we have to follow and which are laid down in our legal act, in our Statistics Act. And the first principle is that statistics should be produced in an impartial and objective way. We shall apply methods that are scientifically checked and according to international standards, and we need to publish documentations on the methods that we apply in our statistics. We are constantly striving for quality improvements, and we have to do that by law. We need to be timely with our statistics, and we shall reduce the response burden on the people who we have to ask when we collect our data. One very important principle is the principle of publication, and I will come to that in the next slide a bit more in detail. The last principle is that we have to apply strict confidentiality, especially when it comes to personal data. The idea is that whatever data we display, you should never be able to build a link back to an individual, be it a corporate or be it a person. Coming to the publication principle, which is driving our work very much. So we have to publish the main results of our statistics free of charge on our website. So everybody can use those data, of course, subject to confidentiality rules. But the second bullet point is a very important bullet point. We have to publish our statistics at the latest 2 months after they were finalized. You might say this is obvious that you don't keep statistics that you produce secretly. This is very obvious for statistics which are produced on a legal basis like a law or regulation. But we also produce statistics on a contractual basis, meaning that a ministry can come to us and ask us to produce a certain statistics. And then, of course, you might produce data and results which are not pleasant to the minister or the institution that asked for these statistics. And this is why this second bullet point is so important, because whoever comes to us with a request to produce a statistic knows that this statistics, whatever the result will be published. So there is nothing that can be hidden below the table or in the drawer. And this is very important because sometimes we experienced, of course, that the results were not so pleasant for the requesting minister. And this gives us a very strong reputation as being an institution that doesn't select the results that it displays to the outside world. We need to follow the principle of equal access. What does that mean? When we publish statistics, there is no such thing as a privileged access. So not even the minister who pays for the statistics in a contract will see the results before the public sees the results. This is a very important principle because you wouldn't know where to start and where to end if you would grant privileged access. It's not always easy to communicate to ministers because they think, well, I pay for this, I want to see it first. And then there's one small exception to this rule. When I'm doing a press conference together with a minister, of course, the minister sitting next to me needs to know what we are talking about. And then there is a possibility, which is documented, that this person will get the data in advance, but only 1 or 2 days in advance in order to prepare for the press conference, and with a very strict obligation that it should not be published before the publication date. Then there is a possibility to provide especially the scientific community with more detailed results on our database. And there we are allowed to charge fees in order to cover the costs that we have. Just a small glance on our governance structure. We have two supervisory bodies. One is the Statistics Council, which has a more advisory function on methods, on the way we produce statistics. And the other one is the Economics Council, which focuses on the use of financial resources, on our budget. They need to approve our budget, which we have to present every year. And then we have a number of 15 expert committees where we explain to special interest groups coming from ministries, institutions, working on a special area. Today, for instance, we had an expert committee on traffic statistics. So you have people from the transport ministry sitting there using our statistics, and they are interested in what will change in this field, what methods we apply, and so on and so forth. Just a small glance on our organizational chart. We have two directors general. I'm responsible for the content part, and my colleague is responsible for the administration and for the in-house administration of Statistics Austria. We have 4 directorates being responsible for different subject matters, and then we have a department on methodology, IT, and internal administration. A small glance on the statistics portfolio that we produce. You can basically structure this in 3 parts. There is a part of social statistics having to do with population growth, labor market health, social statistics, dwellings and buildings. The main part is economics and business statistics, where we have external trade, for instance, where we have national accounts, where we produce inflation data, price statistics, tourism statistics, agriculture, and so on and so forth. And the third part would be a kind of collection of the rest, covering energy statistics, environment statistics, innovation, and mobility. This was a very short overview of our national statistical system, but we are, of course, part of a bigger European family, and this is the structure of the European family. You have the so-called ESS, the European Statistical System, with the highest committee, the ESSC, the European Statistical Committee, where the Director Generals of all 27 member states gather 4 times a year in order to discuss new regulations and new European statistics, which then feed into the national program. I won't go into the organizational parts of the European statistical system, but as you can see, there are directors groups being responsible for all those different subject matters, and in the end, our work feeds into the work of the council formations, most of the time Economic and Financial Council, the ECOFIN, but also into the work of the European Parliament and the Commission. In terms of Eurostat, is part of this ESSC meeting and is chairing this meeting. Now we come to the policy part, and as you might have seen in the media, one small part, of course, of the economic and financial crisis was the discussion that was triggered by the Greek case in terms of statistics, revising over and over again, especially public finance data. And so let me have a few words on how this came all about and what the Commission and what the European system did. I chose the year 2008 and 2009 because this was when it all started, when it all was discussed, and we had 4 points in time where the notification of the deficit figures were published in Greece. The first notification was on the 2nd of October, saying that the deficit in 2008 was 5% of GDP, and the estimate for the current year, 2009, was 3.7% of GDP. Then there was an election short after, and a new government coming in. And whenever a new government comes in, it's always good to start from a very bad basis, because you can only improve afterwards. So what they did, they had a second revised notification only 20 days later, showing those figures. 7.7% of deficit in the year 2008, and the estimate for 2009 was 12.5%. Now, people in the Commission and people in the European Council, in the ECOFIN Council, where ministers of finance sit together, said, okay, that can't be according to our rules, because you can't change deficit figures just like that. So basically what they did is they asked the Commission to provide the ECOFIN Council with a report analyzing how you come from 3.7 to 12.5 without breaking the rules on one or the other side. Now, with hindsight, in 2010, the figures were again revised upwards, and then the latest figure, which was just disseminated a few weeks ago, showed that there was still a revision for 2008, which was rather small, and in 2009 the actual deficit figure was 15.6%. Now, what were the results of the report which was provided by the Commission? And here I collected the main results of this report of the Commission, which was provided to the ECOFIN Council in the beginning of 2010. And the conclusions were that there were severe irregularities in the EDP notification procedure between April and October 2009. Incorrect data were submitted, accounting rules were not respected, and the timing of the notification was not respected. There was poor cooperation between national services compiling those figures. There was a lack of independence of the National Institute with respect to the Ministry of Finance, because basically what happened was that they had to deliver, the Statistics Office had to deliver the data to the Ministry of Finance, and before sending the figures to Brussels, they looked whether the figures would fit their political objectives. So a lack of independence was there, non-transparent and improperly documented bookkeeping, a lack of accountability of individuals being responsible in the production chain of EDP figures, unclear responsibilities, and an ambiguous empowerment of officials being responsible for the data production. So all in all, very severe shortcomings that were displayed to the outside world, basically because this report was put on a website and still is on the website of the European Commission. So what happened afterwards? And there are different layers of reactions. The first were national reactions on the level of Greece itself. There were numerous methodological visits by Eurostat in Greece, really digging through the figures, digging through the institutions and seeing where the problems were. There was a new Statistics Act being put in place in the summer of 2010, where the independence of Elstat, which was the new name for the Statistics Institute, from the Ministry of Finance was embedded. A new Director General was appointed. This is a guy who used to work in the US at the International Monetary Fund, who was not and still is not very deeply connected with the political sphere in Greece. This was to underline the independent role that Elstat should play. A statistics council was put in place, being the watchdog on methods. But you can write laws, but you're not sure whether you can implement them very, very easily. Because to change a living culture is much more difficult than to write very nice articles into a Statistics Act. So in order to bring the reality closer to what you want the statistics system to look like, there is still a further revision just going on just right now in March. This was presented to the Greek Parliament. I haven't heard whether it was decided upon yet, but the main objective was to strengthen the independence of the Statistics Institute in order not to have the figures cooked before they were sent to Brussels or to Luxembourg, where Eurostat is.
Who appoints the director and on what basis?
This is done in the Greek case. It's not a uniform rule in Europe, but in the Greek case, it's the Parliament, and I think they need to have a 2/3 majority in Parliament, just in order not to have it stick to the government itself only. On the European level, there were several consequences from the Greek case. First of all, Eurostat was provided with stronger instruments in order to check the production of EDP, excessive deficit procedure figures. So they used to conduct regular visit in the member states, but now the frequency has increased. They do it on a yearly basis now, and they can conduct what is called methodological visits now. Whenever there is doubt about the figures, whenever there is doubt about revisions and the production of those public finance figures, they can say, well, we are going to visit you and we want to follow the whole production chain of EDP data production, meaning that they go to social security institutions where those figures are fed into the general government deficit and debt figures, and they are checking whether all the steps in the production chain are actually being conducted according to European rules. And Eurostat has, as is put out in the last bullet point, access to all those steps in the production chain. They can go wherever they want and look into the books whether European rules are respected or not. On the European level, we have, like I highlighted on the national level, principles of good conduct. In the statistics field, the code of practice is the document where quality standards are put, where, for instance, this principle of publication is put in as well, and the principle of independence. And ministers, the ECOFIN Council said, well, you need to strengthen those principles in order to avoid cases like we experienced in Greece. And this is a process which was started in 2010 and which is still ongoing, and I will come to this just in a minute. So the independence of national statistical institutes needs to be strengthened, and the protection from political interference in the production of those figures is very crucial. In the case of Greece, a new instrument was introduced, the so-called commitment on confidence, where basically the Prime Minister of Greece, together with the commissioner being responsible, the European Commissioner being responsible for statistics, signed up to a document saying that we are going to respect those principles that I was just talking about, those code of conduct principles. We are going to respect the independence of the National Statistical Institute. We are respecting the European rules when collecting and putting together public finance statistics, and this is very visible, and this is signed up to by the highest political body in the respective member state. The idea of Eurostat and the European Commission is to have such a commitment on confidence in each single European member state, but the discussion is still going on. What the consequence of this request from the ECOFIN Council to strengthen those principles is that we are going to amend the basic European regulation dealing with EU statistics, which is the Regulation 223 of the year 2009. And there, in this new regulation, which just went to the Council as a Commission proposal, and which we hope to finalize in the first half of, or in autumn, I would say realistically. And this new regulation, or this amended regulation, should strengthen the independence of NSIs. The coordinating role of NSIs should be strengthened as well, because you have countries where many different statistical producers produce European statistics, and you need to gather them together and tell them you need to do that according to the principles that we laid down in the Code of Conduct. And one important feature is going to be that as we are held up as statistical institutes to use more and more administrative data when we produce our statistics, then our say in the design of administrative data should be strengthened as well. Just to give you one example, for instance, in 2001, we conducted in Austria, we conducted the last census, the population census, in a traditional manner, meaning that people went from household to household with those forms that you need to fill out, and then this is coming back to the Statistics Institute, and we produce population figures and several other information out of those forms. This is not a very efficient way to conduct a census. And in 2011, we changed this mode completely, and we only used administrative data when we conducted our census, gathering 99% of the information that we gathered 10 years before in the traditional mode, but we divided the costs by the factor of 7 with the same quality or even a higher quality of statistics. But you can only do that if you interact very closely with those institutions and ministries who hold administrative data and where you have a say in the design of administrative data when it is collected. And the last point, which I already touched upon, is the idea to have this commitment on confidence as a recommendation in this regulation that every single member state should sign up to this commitment on confidence. Now, coming to those 3 examples that I want to run through with you together to see where the interlinkage between policymaking and statistics is very, very close. The first example is, again, referring to the economic and financial crisis and the consequences that were drawn in terms of policymaking, economic policymaking. And as you know, the fiscal surveillance part, which is the Stability and Growth Pact, and the surveillance of excessive deficit procedures was strengthened. Sanctions are now easier to implement, and the straitjacket, the fiscal straitjacket is putting much more pressure on member states to get deficits and debt figures down. But those deficit and debt figures are produced, again, by statistical institutes, as we discussed on the Greek case. And and so on. The second thing was that one lesson of the economic and financial crisis was that macroeconomic imbalances can lead to very risky situations where you see things get out of hand. So you want to implement a kind of monitoring system where you detect those imbalances, these macroeconomic imbalances very early, and you can react on that very early. So a thing called macroeconomic imbalance procedure was put in place, and I will show you the dashboard of indicators which is used for this procedure. Then, a bit later, you might have read in the newspaper that the reaction was, of course, to provide money to those countries which were in trouble, like Ireland, like Greece, like also Portugal, where the financial sector was under extreme stress. So bodies like the EFSF and the European Stability Mechanism was put in place, but the political deal was you cannot do that without strengthening, on the other hand, the pressure to bring down your deficit and debt figures again. So going even beyond what is in the Stability and Growth Pact, this fiscal compact was signed by several, not by all, member states, and there you should strive for a structural deficit which is over the medium term lower than 0.5% of GDP. This is all to tell you that the figures that we produce in our statistical system are at the grounds of whether a member state will fall under a certain procedure being decided on the political level, and then in the end, if it can't get the act together, will have to pay sanctions. Just a small glance on the latest figure on the deficits. You see a whole variety of deficit figures. The euro area and the EU 27 are in yellow, and you have Ireland being on the one side with the highest deficit figures, which is of course going back to the measures they had to take to save their financial sector, followed by Greece, Spain, and the UK. And you have, on the other hand, Hungary and Estonia having surpluses in their budgets. Those are the debt figures. And you see, this is a very good lesson for statistical averages, because if you would take out the extreme, like Greece, you would see the EU 27 and the euro area average moving quite drastically to the left, and this would be, of course, for those countries, including Austria, for instance, rather difficult to sell politically, because you need to tell that you're above the European average, which is driven, of course, very much by Greece, Italy, and Ireland again. The second part, which I already touched upon very briefly, the macroeconomic imbalance procedure. This is the procedure where you try to detect those imbalances. You have a procedure where, in the first place, you have an alert mechanism report being put together by the Commission, displaying a dashboard of indicators where you can see that one or the other indicator is above the threshold, and therefore there are small lamps blinking saying, well, watch this indicator more closely. Then this report is taken to the group of ministers, to the ECOFIN Council. They discuss the conclusions of the Commission and will ask for an in-depth review in those countries where many or several of those indicators are above the threshold. And then you have basically three possible conclusions. first conclusion would be there is no problem, even after checking. This is only a one-off crossing of the threshold. Then there might be the conclusion that there is an imbalance. You should work on it, but it's not a high risk. And the third conclusion might be that there is a severe imbalance where high risks are attached to this country, and you need to do something, and the Commission will give certain recommendations with deadlines that need to be followed. And if those deadlines are not kept, then there is also a sanction possible in the pipeline. This report is prepared every year, and for the first time this was prepared now in the spring 2012. And I will come to the figures just in a second. This is a chart you certainly will not be able to read, but this is just to show you the dashboard of indicators. Consists of 10 indicators. One part is dealing with external imbalances and competitiveness, including current account balances, real effective exchange rates, for instance, export market shares, and the development of unit labor costs, trying to cover the competition part. And then you have internal imbalances, where you have a look at house price developments, for instance, private sector, credit indebtedness, public sector debt, and the unemployment rate on a 3-year average. And to each and every of those indicators, the Commission calculates a threshold, saying this is the red line. When this red line is crossed, then we have this lamp blinking, and we need to have a closer look at this country and at this indicator. This is just copied out of this first report, where you have all the European member states, and whenever a cell is grey, then there is a crossing of the threshold. And you can see that it is not it's not a report which is just a pro forma and not a serious report, but you can see that there's quite a whole lot of crossing of those thresholds, and in all those cases. And this is additional indicators in addition to the 10 indicators, the basic leading indicators. And the recommendation of the Commission is to have a closer look on all those countries which have a accumulation of several of those grey areas.
Is this reported once a year? Or?
Yes, this is every year. And there's a procedure called the European semester, where in the beginning of this European semester in the spring, you will have always on the basis of the latest figures a report displaying the crossing or non-crossing of those thresholds according to the individual indicators.
Mitigations can include.
Pardon?
Mitigations also include.
A mitigation?
Correction actions or.
Yeah. Well, like in the procedure that I ran through here, what happens is after this report is being put together, this is presented to ministers, saying that we would recommend X number of countries to undergo an in-depth review. And coming out of this in-depth review, the Commission will come up with proposals, with assessment first, and then with certain recommendations of policy actions. So that is the procedure. The last example I wanted to highlight is the Europe 2020 objectives, this initiative where you have basically 5 areas where you want to improve until the year 2020, the area of employment where you want to increase the share of the 20 to 64-year-olds being employed to a figure of 75%. You want to increase investment in research and development. You have some climate change objective, education objectives, and social exclusion and poverty reduction objectives. This is not to go through the individual indicators by itself, but just to tell you that each and every of those indicators, not 90% of those indicators are produced in the statistics world. So what does that mean for our work at the European level and on the national level? Well, this is still the Europe 2020. You break down the objectives which are fixed on the European level to your national context, and then you have different figures. For instance, the European objective to have renewable energy is a share of 20%. But as we in Austria, we already have a very high standard in terms of renewables. Our national standard is far beyond that, and we need to head for a share of 34% of renewable energies. So what are the consequences for our work in the statistical field? As I said, we need to develop politically relevant indicators in order to monitor those objectives that are being set by the political system. So I already mentioned the Europe 2020 targets and the indicators there. But for instance, there was a discussion on well-being indicators. How do you measure the progress of societies? As you know, GDP is always the one and only figure being quoted when you talk about progress of societies. But what you actually do is when you measure GDP is you measure the sum of production of an economy, but you don't measure really the well-being of people, you don't measure the distribution of income, you don't measure the use of resources. So what you want to do basically is to broaden your picture and to look at indicators together with GDP, which give a more comprehensive picture of the well-being and progress of societies. So in this field, for instance, statistical world is working on new indicators, on the presentation of already existing data in a more comprehensive way. Of course, if you need to take decisions on the basis of figures, of facts, you want to have those facts in a very timely manner. You don't want to take your decisions on the basis of information which is 5 years old. So we need to get quicker, we need to speed up, but at the same time not lose in quality, because there's always a trade-off between quality and speed, of course. You don't want to display your GDP figure and then revise it by 3 percentage points only 5 months later, just in order to be quick. And as I mentioned, the reaction of the European Union to deal with problems that emerged in the economic and financial crisis was basically to put in place more rules and to put stricter rules in place. And to all those rules, you have thresholds being attached to. And this brings the statistics producers in a situation of a kind of referee. Yeah? You produce a figure, and as soon as it crosses the threshold, you create a political problem and even sanctions maybe. So what the reaction of the political world certainly is, they turn back to the Statistics Institute and tell you, don't produce such crazy figures. You cause a political problem for me. And in this context, and I will come back to this, it's very important to have a clear dividing line between the political world on the one hand and the statistics world on the other side. Of course, you want to follow developments in our society. You want to increase the information that you provide in scope, depth, and quality. But we all are financed by public finance, and of course we suffer the consequences of the European crisis in terms of budget constraints. All the public sector has to cut down on its budget, and this is of course a very difficult constraint to meet also in the statistics world. So what I said, it is very crucial if you provide figures which are politically highly relevant to have a clear distinguishing gap between the statistics world on the one hand and on the political world on the other hand. So you need to have independence on the choice of methods. You need to have an institutional independence. So you can't have a minister telling you, no, those are not the correct figures. You need to correct your figures in order to be in line with my objectives as policymaker. You have a need for a personal independence. So the nomination of leaders in statistical institutes need to follow objective rules and procedures. And of course, you would need financial independence in order not to be dependent too much on those policymakers, which then in the end can put pressure on you because you, of course, you need to pay your staff, you need to finance your work. But if you ask for a lot of independence, you need to introduce the element of accountability on the other side as well. So you would need, as an independent statistics institute, to introduce some reporting system to Parliament, to the sovereign in an economy, in a state, in order to justify the acts that you carry out on the basis of independence. You need to enforce European rules. And the one and most prominent rule, which is the rule how to put together the system of national accounts in member states, is the European system of accounts ISA 95, which is undergoing a review just these days. And those are the rules which tell you what to include in the deficit figures, for instance, and in the debt figures, and what to exclude. Just to name one important example. And lastly, the coordinating role of national statistical institutes, meaning to coordinate other statistics producers in member states, needs to be strengthened in order to be sure that those principles on the European level that we all agreed upon and that we live up to in terms of quality are actually respected in member states. This was basically a short overview of statistics production on the one hand and the interlinkages, the very close interlinkages between the statistics world and policy making. And I'm very happy to go into the discussion now and answer one or the other question if it's not too difficult for me to answer.
Firstly, since some of the data was rather difficult to read, would it be possible that you share the presentation?
Yeah. I'm happy to leave the presentation with the academy, so you can have a printout tomorrow, I think, or whenever you meet again.
And the second question would be, do you also have some interfaces or discussion with organizations like IHS or WIFO?
Yeah, of course. I mean, WIFO and IHS are heavy users of our data. For instance, I touched upon this issue of well-being and finding new indicators. This is a European initiative on the one hand, going back to a thing called Stiglitz report. I don't know if you maybe have heard about this. There was a commission being chaired by Stiglitz proposing new ways to measure progress and well-being, and the European statistical system tried to translate those recommendations in our statistical world and to produce new indicators which then broaden the picture beyond GDP. And on the national level, we are just trying to put together those indicators. In this endeavor, we are in very close contact with the experts from the WIFO who will first of all use those indicators, but then will of course be able to tell us what indicators they think are more important. If you, for instance, want to talk about social inclusion, there are a variety of indicators that you can use. Yeah, the risk of falling under the poverty line, for instance, or social exclusion. There are many indicators, and in order to find the right indicators to cover this dimension of well-being, of progress of societies, we try to discuss with experts from the research institutes, but also from universities and from social partners, from different institutions who have an expertise in this field.
Don't you think that Google knows more than official agency about households? Do you think probably that in the future everything will be in cloud? And it will be cloud computing.
Cloud computing, yeah.
Probably it will be no need in official agencies. So just.
No, it's a very relevant question that you ask. And my answer would be the world is not lacking statistical information. Even if you would explode all the NSIs in Europe, there would still be data out there. The difference, and this is our pride, is the difference in quality and in the documentation of the methods that we use and the scientific measures that we use. There's a dividing line that we draw between official statistics, where we put our quality stamp on, and the collection of data. It's very easy to collect data and to prove whatever you want to prove, and we will never compete with Google in terms of number of data, and that's not our objective. Our objective would be that if we put together statistics, then we can say those statistics are representative for a certain area, for a certain population group, and we applied methods that were agreed on an international level, that are respected internationally. And what is very interesting is we are able to compare our results with the results of the same statistics in other European countries. And of course, beyond Europe as well, because there is a statistics dialogue going on at the UN level as well. Every year I travel to New York and we have a discussion with mostly developing countries, but also with the United States and Russia sitting on the table, in order to make international figures comparable. So I don't think that there is a competition. We are not trying to compete with Google in terms of quantity of data. What we try to do is to be very serious about methods, about comparability and quality standards. That's our asset that we bring into the discussion.
Am I right? The Statistics Austria is a non-profit organization, basically, or a non-profit?
It's public.
And how is it financed exactly? Or where does the finances come from? And you said you're selling part of also part of your business, or the profit business, so where you're selling the data. And how is it, if you would look at it through a private sector glasses? How is Statistics Austria doing?
Well, first of all, the financing system. We have a lump sum which is coming from the public budget every year, which is put in the Statistics Act, and which is 50 million euro a year. Yeah, and on the top of that, we have another around 20 million, which we make out of contractual statistics that are asked from ministries, from institutions, and which are of course paid for. And whenever we are asked to produce a database or a statistics, then the procedure is that we make a calculation of what is needed. Either we can use administrative data, which is the less expensive way, or we need to conduct representative surveys. And the more detailed information you want to have, for instance, in terms of regions, the more people you need to ask, and you need to extend your sample, and that is what is expensive. Yeah. So we make a calculation, and we make a proposal, and then there is an agreement or not an agreement. We experience both cases, of course, because the requests for information is always never ending. Yeah, there are many requests that we are faced with, but the capabilities to finance those requests are limited, and so we have to agree on a certain sum, on a certain output. We choose the method, and we agree, as I said, with the contractual partner that this statistics is going to be published on our website and being made accessible for the outside world.
The second question, I think it's the Kingdom of Bhutan or something. Who's
Sorry?
I think it's the Kingdom of Bhutan or who's collecting this happiness index or happiness statistics. I mean, I know it's maybe a bit more populist statistics, but wouldn't something like this would be nice to see it also from Statistical Austria for Austria.
Well, the project that I was talking about, these well-being indicators and the progress of society indicators, go in this direction. They are not measuring happiness in this sense, but we have a small part of it where we have subjective indicators. Well, for instance, if you want to measure the well-being, there are two possible approaches. One is an objective approach. So well-being would be, for instance, to have access to the educational system. Yeah, and this can be measured in an objective way. Do I have to pay in order to have my children go to kindergarten or to school, or don't I have to pay for it? And if I have to pay for it, can I afford it? Or can't I afford it? This is objectively measurable. At the same time, people individually attach different value to education. Yeah, and you can ask this subjective part: would it be worthwhile to have more funds go to universities, for instance, to have better university teachers, for instance? Yes or no, and then the household or the person being interviewed can give his or her subjective answer, or you can have a subjective question: how do you feel today? Do you feel better than last year? Do you feel threatened by whatever risk, economic risk, criminal risk? Are you satisfied with the government institution in this country, yes or no? Those are subjective indicators that you can feed into this broader picture of well-being, but you need to be very careful, of course, what method you use. But it is possible. It's not impossible. It's not unserious to do that.
Who decides what questions will be asked in the feedback and will be used in statistics?
Would be used in
the statistics or in the feedback when you make statistics. So you ask people questions or connected data. So you have some specific data. So who decides these questions or methodology?
Well, the procedure is the following. Most of the time you have an information request. So you have policymakers saying, I want to know how I can make my economy more knowledge-based. Yeah? And then statisticians come in and they suggest well, you can use the indicator X, which shows how much money you put in research and development. That is what happened in the Europe 2020 case, for instance. And then politicians say, okay, well, sounds reasonable. Then a regulation is put in place on the European level. And in this regulation, you get more and more specific. And you formulate, and what the approach that we follow in the European context is that we use the so-called output harmonization. So you define the variables that you want to have as results of your statistics. For instance, the share of budget being spent in terms of GDP on research and development. But you leave it open to member states and to national statistical institutes how to put together those figures. Of course, there are guidelines, but there is a degree of freedom which is sensible because societies are different, institutions are different in different member states, and you would not get very good results if you would apply exactly the same method in all cases. Just one example, if you measure inflation, for instance, you always do that by measuring prices of a certain basket of goods. And of course, this basket of goods needs to reflect the consumption behavior of a certain society. And the consumption behavior in Austria is distinct from the consumption behavior in Spain and in Finland. So it would not be a good idea to impose one and exactly the same consumer basket in each country, because you would measure things that are never bought, for instance, and in other cases you would not measure other things that are very important in the consumption pattern of a society. So for that reason we follow in the statistical system the idea of output harmonization rather than of input harmonization, even though the debate is not closed, and in some cases it does make sense even to have a rather strict approach on the questions, especially when it comes to subjective indicators.
Actually, even in Austria, you have different consumption baskets. So if you have young people and old people, older people are not buying computers or smartphones that often.
Yeah, true. We even have an index showing the inflation pattern for elderly people. So we have pensioners who have a different consumer basket than, as you said, the average society. Just to give you one example of difficulty that we have, for instance, we have 50% of Austrian households who own houses, who live in their own houses, and you have 50% of the population who is renting apartments or housing. So how do you feed rents and development of rents in this consumer basket? In the statistics world, you use a 50% weight, which is wrong for both sides, of course. Yeah? For those who rent apartments, it is underweighted, and for those who own apartments or houses, this is an overweight of the price developments because it doesn't affect them. But statistics is always a world of averages, and we need to live with those compromises, or we look at very specific groups in society where you can, for instance, look at pensioners and look at their consumption patterns, but even those rent and non-rent issues you can't clear out of the pensioners. Still have this problem there.
Which board or who decides about new indicators, not about the definition, how it is calculated, inflation, whatever, which cause it is, but who decides if a new ratio or percentage point is calculated?
I come back to this chart on the European.
If I pay for something, it's an initiative to do so. Well, basic research, which is not funded by private bodies. Like, I don't know who decides if the public body wants to know the birth names of all Austrian newborns. which is actually not very, I think, expensive because of that many users of data.
Yeah.
Who decides which basic data is produced or not?
Yeah. Well, you need to distinguish between the national and the European level. On the European level, you have this procedure that a request comes either through the Commission or through the Council or the European Parliament. This is the political level. An information request is fed through the Commission most of the time into the statistical system. And then we discuss possible indicators in order to meet this information request. And there will be a proposal coming out of those directors groups going to the level of director generals, and the proposal is being put back to the political level, saying if you want to know about research and development, you can use those indicators. And then the procedure is that this goes back to the Council, where the member states are represented at the political level, and then they decide, okay, that's exactly what we want. They sign off on the European regulation, and this program, these statistical indicators need to be put into the portfolio of European statistics. That's the European level. 90% or even more than 90% of our work is driven by this route, by statistical requirements coming from the European Union. But of course you have national requirements which can go beyond this, and this is basically going back to the financing possibilities of different ministries or institutions. If they can finance the information requirement that they want to have put in our statistical production system, then they will ask us, and we can tell them, okay, we can do it. We can do it this way, that way. Then this calculation system comes into play, and in the end you get an agreement or you don't get an agreement. So it's a thing of give and take, but the impulse needs to come from from outside the statistical system. I can't decide that tomorrow, because I find it interesting, tomorrow I will start statistics on foreign students sitting in very fancy classrooms in the evening of Thursdays. It might be interesting to me because I'm talking to you just now, and I would be interesting how many people do the same thing that you do, but I can't do that in the official statistical world. I need to get a request from a ministry or from an institution, and I need to get the finance package to come with it.
Do you calculate the cost of collecting the information for indicators? How to evaluate the usefulness of indicators?
You mean I get an information request from a minister, and I tell this minister, listen, I can do it, but it's rubbish.
That if you collect the information from households and companies, it means the cost for these companies and households.
Yeah.
And the country level, it's quite a big cost.
Okay, I see. Okay, that's what I.
It's a question of quality and speed. So
yeah.
It's a question of cost and efficiency of this activity.
Yeah. One of the principles that we need to live up to is the principle number 5, is the reduction of the response burden. So we need to take into account the burden that we cause in companies or with households if we overflow them with surveys and keep asking them all the time. How do we do that? First of all, we try to use administrative data wherever possible. So you don't need to bother companies, you don't need to ask questions which were answered already somewhere else, again, because you can collect this information. We use administrative data like tax data on income, like turnover data coming from tax administration and things like that. We use employment data coming from Social Security, for instance. So where it's possible, we try to avoid asking people or companies. But this cannot be avoided in all cases. And of course, this is always an issue, and that's the reason why we have this principle in our Statistics Act. But of course, you cause trouble with those people who need to answer. There's a trade-off between information that you gather on the one hand and the response burden on the other hand. It was promised, I think, that after this lecture there is a possibility to have a drink and a buffet. So if you like to continue our conversation in a more cozy atmosphere, we can probably move to the other room if that's okay, and have a chat over 1 or 2 or 3 drinks. Thank you very much for listening.